Hello, Journal Besties. Welcome back to another reading journal video featuring my What I Read in February reads. First look here is my captain's log, where I log every single book I read throughout the year and track a few statistics like when I finished it, how I read it, how long it was, and whether I currently own it, borrow it, or bought it new. In February, I read 11 books, so we have lots to update in this journal today. So thank you for hanging out with me.
Now, I'm not going to update every single page in this video, but I did want to sort of highlight a couple pages that I made the most edits to. I'm going to be using this Crayola Super Tip blue marker, which I've set aside for February, to make all of the edits for this month, starting with my unread library, where I'm just marking off the books that are on my physical bookshelf that I was able to read this month. This page is going to look so satisfying at the end of the year with everything filled in.
After a very successful no-buy January, where I only bought Onyx Storm because it was a pre-order, you can see I did a little bit of damage. So here is my book haul. And it looks like we're going to have to feed the Kraken this month, but I can defend myself somewhat. Tomorrow, and tomorrow I've already read, so this does not count for my book ban. A Sea of Unspoken Things I earned by playing my Kraken challenge. And while I thrifted both XOXO and Gilded in the month of February, I read both of them immediately, and therefore they do not feed the Kraken. But that still leaves me with 3 more books added to my TBR, so I'm going to have to take a hit. So we're going to jump over to my Battle of the Kraken to log my results. So here we'll add a 3 in Fed the Kraken, but we read 7 books from the TBR. If you're new here, I have challenged myself this year to read 100 books off of my physical TBR. I'm calling it the Battle of the Kraken, and it looks something like this. Every time I read a book that I previously physically owned, I get to count it off in the read section. Anytime I purchase a book that I do not immediately read, it goes into the fed section. At the end of the year, I need to balance it out to 100 books off of my TBR. So therefore, everything I read plus any additional numbers I'm adding to the fed section in order to win. Now, there's some fun things too. I get to purchase some brand new books as I level up in certain ways. So that can be by finishing a series, finishing a backlist, or reading 10 standalones from my TBR. And I've created little stamp cards to help motivate me to continue with this. So in February, I finished my Ruth Ware backlist. I have now read everything published by Ruth Ware, and therefore I get to choose a new book. So for that, I chose A Sea of Unspoken Things by Adrienne Young. Also added 6 more books to my list of standalones, earning me another book, which I pre-ordered, which is Betrayal of Eden by Erin Phillips, and that will come in May. So while I did feed my Kraken this month, I did make a pretty significant dent in my bookshelf, so I still think we're at a win. What do you guys think? Returning back here, I have my first Walk the Plank, and that is awarded to Disappearing Earth by Julia Phillips.
The least thrilling thriller book ever. On this page, I track all of the stats for February. So this month I read 11 books, which totaled 275 pages with my eyeballs and 133 hours of audiobooks. I did not read any new arcs, but I did read A Sea of Unspoken Things, which is in my January anticipated reads. And I did finish that with my eyeballs. So this gets added to my 25 books that I physically read this year. And here I'm just doing my best to kind of mimic the colors that are along the spine so that I can color that in. And then hopefully at the end of the year, it'll resemble an actual bookshelf. I'm also in the middle of a couple other books, but haven't quite finished them yet.
This month I did terrible at continuing series I've already started and started 3 more series. But we read The Crimson Moth, Heartless Hunter, first book. I read the first book in Stalking Jack the Ripper, and then the first book in the Gilded Duology.
I didn't do any buddy reads this month, but I did have my 2 book clubs, and I'm just pasting in the book covers for those selections here. Now, getting into challenges.
I forgot to print out my little readathon logo, but I participated in Forensic February this month. And these are all of the places I visited in February through my books. For Sail of the Seven Seas, I completed my first mission, which was the Caspian Sea, which borders Russia. Now, I'm not sure if I want to count this book, which was Disappearing Earth by Julia Phillips, just because it's on the complete opposite side of Russia and not bordering the Caspian Sea at all. And I also just really hated this book. So I might still try to read something else for that prompt, but for now, it's there. And next we have book bingo. I actually did complete some of this month. So let's play bingo. Now, the way that I do this is when I finish a book, I can peel off this washi tape and it'll give me my grid coordinates for the bingo board. I won't do this in order of what I read, but I read The Giver of Stars. So I can peel that off and it reveals N5. So then I take this coordinate, I find N5, and that's where I put in the little book cover. And I think it's going to look so fun all filled in. We'll see if I get a blackout this year, but at the very least, I'd like to try for at least one bingo. I also read Pachinko, which is O3, and A Tale for the Time Being, which was B1. So far, nothing's in a row. I'm going to have to read a lot more from this list before I get a bingo. I did very well at my alphabet challenge this month.
For the letter G, I read Gilded. I'm replacing Hello Beautiful with Heartless Hunter because I liked that book better. Read Pachinko for the letter P, and I get to cross off X and Z already from XOXO and 0 Days. And on this last page, I'm just marking the days in which I finished books. An X is for an audiobook, and an X with a circle is for a physical book or an ebook.
Bringing us to Adventure in Aldea. So this is my little familiar, Bo, and he is traveling around the map for me as we complete different quests. So in February, the prompt was to read a book from the top shelf. And for that, I chose Heartless Hunter by Kristen Ziccarelli. So I'm currently right here, which means I can either travel to 3A or 3D. And the prompts for those would be to drink from the well, a book with a drink on the cover, or inspect the well, which is to read a thriller. So I'm going to just put these prompts on the inside here until I decide what I want to read, and I'll come back to that in March. But now that everything's been updated, let's get into February. So in February, I participated in Forensic February, led by Chloe's Crime Scene Corner. I'll link her page in the description. So you can ignore my game board. This is kind of what I was using as I played the game before I set up my spreads. But essentially, it's built like a Monopoly board. And as you go around the board, you're going to get different reading prompts. So you can either roll a dice, you can just free read and see how many of these prompts you can fulfill. And as you do that, it builds your case and it solves the crime for you. So what I tried to do in February was the first week, I tried to stick to all of these prompts. Second week, I tried to stick to these prompts. Third week was this, and fourth week, this, which I pretty much fulfilled except for Gilded. I did read this last in February, but it only worked for this prompt here. But anyway, that's how I played the game. And I was trying to figure out how I wanted to build this into my journal when I remembered a spread from Katie's Reading. This is one of the spreads that honestly made me want to start doing like a monthly scrapbook style journal for each individual book that I read. And it's this A Good Girl's Guide to Murder spread by Katie is Reading. It's genius. She's making this like murder board. So I thought that would be a very fun concept to adopt into my journal here. So thanks, Katie, for the idea. And thanks, Chloe, for hosting an awesome readathon. So Katie had some actual like cork board style stationery paper. I couldn't find any of that, but I did find a burlap piece of scrapbook paper that I thought would still communicate what we're trying to do. So I'll use that for the backdrop. I have a couple extra things like a manila envelope, a magnifying glass, and just this kind of paper tag, evidence tag that I thought would work well. I've printed out all the book covers, and those are going to be our suspects. I also chose kind of like a typewritten font to fit a style of like a case. And then, of course, we need some red string to string around our suspects. Katie used an embroidery thread, so I thought that was a good idea. So I copied her there. And then she used little brads to connect the string. I couldn't find those anywhere. Everything was way too big. So I think I'm just going to glue the string down to the page and then use some gold wax to create like a little pin. We're going to see if it works. Hopefully, since this is like the last step, I don't ruin the whole spread, but wish me luck. Here we go.
Where's the you that we all used to love? When the spirit came upon you like a dove, and your love looked exactly like ours was. I can't believe it's not enough. And since the day that you dyed your hair black, we were worried that the serpent would snap. Never know when you might be attacked. And once you go, you can never come back. But now the current pulls you out toward that ocean we spoke about. I always thought that all we needed lived around its mouth, but you find peace within the river's sound. And your love was received through a sieve, and it left a small crease in your gifts, and furrowed brows on the way that you lived. I can't believe the things you did to find light in the darkest of rooms, to find sun in the smallest of moons, to find that everyone dies too soon. So I know it loved the road to ruin, but now the current pulls you out toward that ocean we spoke about. I always thought that all we needed lived around its mouth, but you find peace within the river's sound. taught me movement sometimes can be safe. I was always scared to run away. Tied lines were told that we should trace, drawn by pens of someone else's faith. But I've always loved the pictures that yours paint.
Placing the final finishing touches on this board, but I think it turned out so cool, and it's a perfect introduction to my book reviews. So to start off the month, I started with 2 books by Ruth Ware. I knew that that was one of the quicker ways for me to earn my next new book to purchase was by finishing a backlist. So I picked those books up off my shelf. I also wanted to get that Z in my A to Z challenge. The better of the 2 was 0 Days, which is the one I started with. This is about a gal who gets framed for murdering someone close to her. And the police, she's the number 1 suspect, so she goes on the run and she tries to solve the case before the police do so that she can prove her innocence. And it's complicated because she doesn't know who she can trust since she doesn't know who is framing her. I thought that one was an interesting concept, and it felt a little different from some of her other books, but still pretty standard as far as a Ruth Ware story goes. And I liked it. I would give that one 3.5 stars. I also really enjoy any Ruth Ware books because they're narrated by Imogen Church, who I think is a very talented narrator. One Perfect Couple was a letdown for me. This is about a couple who decide to go on a reality TV show, and it turns into a "and then there were none" situation, which I feel like Ruth Ware has already written about a couple times, so it didn't feel like anything new or original to me. So for that one, I would say 2 stars. Next to the book covers, I'm just writing in a couple bits of information to track, like the genre of the book, where it's set, and who the narrator is. Since I listen to so many audiobooks, I wanted some type of way to track the audiobook narrators that I really enjoy, and I thought this would be a good system. On the opposite page, I am creating a full page spread for A Sea of Unspoken Things, since this was one of my 5-star favorite reads of the month. I had a feeling it was going to be because Adrienne Young is probably my favorite author of all time. But if you don't know, this book is about a set of twins, a brother and sister, James and Johnny, and the book starts off with Johnny recently having passed away. So his twin sister is grieving, and she's, something doesn't feel quite right about this death. So she decides to go back to her hometown, which is 6 Rivers, California, and kind of just get close to him. She feels like in some ways this connection has been severed, and in other ways she still feels like she was there. So she has to go home to kind of unravel this mystery feeling that she has. And when she's there, she reconnects with old friends that she hasn't seen in years, and it's just lovely. I also just really love the way that Adrienne Young writes magical realism. She transports you from a real life setting and just adds a little magical touch, and I think she does that so well. The 2 pictures I'm placing at the bottom of the page are just to represent the 2 important men in James's life, her brother Johnny, and then her childhood friend Micah. And then lastly, to kind of frame in my book review, I'm adding this broken line border all the way around the page just to, again, define the edges and give some consistency between the 2 spreads. The next book that I really enjoyed was Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco. This is an older book, and it's the first of 4 in a series, but it's about a young girl named Audrey Rose who solves some mysteries, starting with the notorious Jack the Ripper. And while this is a work of fiction, it is based on true events. There really was a serial killer named Jack the Ripper, which inspired this book. So, in our story, though, we have our young teenager who is helping her uncle perform autopsies on these victims of the serial killer. And she starts to notice patterns that lead her to believe that the killer may be someone that she knows. And then she goes on her own little detective quest to solve the mystery with the help of her associate, Thomas. I'm a real big fan of anything set in this Victorian era London, and this book was very reminiscent of Anatomy by Dana Schwartz, if you've read that duology. Um, it was just so enjoyable for me, and I'm excited to continue the rest of the series. We've got some mystery surrounding Houdini and Dracula, so it sounds like a good series and something that I'm going to be all about. Next, I'm going to transition from my thrillers and mysteries into fantasy. I read two fantasy books this month. One was Heartless Hunter by Kristen Ciccarelli, and then the other was Gilded by Marissa Meyer. Heartless Hunter is about a young socialite who, by night, is known as the Crimson Moth, who is a vigilante who tries to free enslaved witches. It has a how to lose a guy in 10 days type storyline where two characters have to use each other for their own personal gain. So that was fun. But I had a hard time feeling the chemistry between the two main love interests because I wanted her with somebody else and it didn't go that direction. So I'm hoping to get on board with book two. Then we have Gilded by Marissa Meyer, and this is also a duology set in fantastical Germany, and it's a Rumpelstiltskin retelling. I really, really loved her Alice in Wonderland retelling, so I had a feeling that this was going to be another 5-star read for me. I think overall I would say it's 4 stars. I didn't quite like it as much as Heartless, but it's also the first in a duology, so I think that the second book has potential for really gripping me like Heartless did. Up next, we're getting into my historical and contemporary fiction books, starting with the ones that have the most colorful colors, because I thought those would look nice together on a page side by side. So I thrifted A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki because I fell in love with the color and the premise sounded really interesting. It's kind of a back and forth between two characters. Ruth, who lives in San Francisco, she stumbles upon a Hello Kitty lunchbox that's kind of washed up on the beach near her house, and inside she finds a diary from a girl in Japan named Now. And Now is kind of just writing about the woes of her teenage life. And Ruth just feels this connection to her just as an older woman who's kind of gone through some things too, but somehow wants to connect with her, and their only connection is through this diary. It's really good. It was really sad, but overall, I love it and I recommend it. The Giver of Stars was another favorite this month. It is about a team of women in Depression era America who decide to set up a traveling library and educate the people and kids around them, and hopefully get them to be a more literate society. And that was really good. I picked up XOXO to, fulfill that X on my A to Z challenge. But this was a fun one. It's a young adult romance contemporary book about a gal who moves from America to Seoul, Korea to go to a music school and, falls in love with a pop star. It's very cute. And then lastly, Disappearing Earth, which we don't need to talk about because it was so boring. The book I do want to talk about, though, is Pachinko by Minjin Lee. This is my favorite book of the month, and I knew it was going to be a 5-star read, or at least I was really, really hoping that it would be, because I watched the Apple TV show remake from this book, and it was so, so good. I loved that show so much, and I knew I wanted to read the book. So finally picked it up. This story follows our main character, Sunja, who the book starts out and she's a young child. So you kind of get to see her early years in Korea with her parents and get that story. And then, since this book takes place during the Japanese occupation of Korea, her character actually moves from Korea to Japan. And you see kind of the two very different worlds that she's exposed to. And then her starting her own family, having kids, having grandkids, and just navigating through all of these generations and different worlds that she's grown up in. It's so sweet. I really, really love it. And then I started a beast of a book called The Count of Monte Cristo. This is another one of my favorite stories as far as like movies go. And I've always wanted to read this book. I've picked it up a couple times, but I haven't made it the full way through because this book is 117 chapters long. It's over 1,500 pages. It is a beast. And of course, I want to read the unabridged version. So, yeah, I'm going to have to take a couple months to get through this. But if you don't know, this book is about a character named Edmond Dantes. And, he's got everything going for him. He has a great new job, and he's about to get married to the love of his life. He's healthy, he's spry, he's a young kid with like the world ahead of him. And out of jealousy, someone sets him up and sends him to prison. And kind of all of his hopes and dreams are smashed overnight. And so that's kind of the catalyst for the story. It's kind of a revenge story, but also like show mercy where mercy is due, too. So a lot of really good themes. Anyway, I'm doing a readathon of this book and hoping to finish this before May so that I can read a Count of Monte Cristo retelling by one of my favorite authors, Erin Phillips. So I'm hoping to finish this before May, or at least a good chunk of it. I've already read the portion of Count of Monte Cristo that applies to the retelling since it's going to be a 3-part series. But I know that if I don't just smash it out, continue on with the story, I'll forget about it and I'll pick something else up. So that's a goal for the next couple months, is to finish The Count of Monte Cristo. What about you guys? Do you guys have any like dream books, the books that you have to read before you die, the ones that are so intimidating, but you just like starve to read them in some way? This is that kind of book for me. Count of Monte Cristo, War and Peace, I really want to read. Anna Green Gables, I know it's a kid's book, but I've never read it. Let me know in the comments, what are those books for you that you just have to read before you die? All right, guys, now we're going to jump into the final flip. I just want to say thank you so much for watching this video and for being here and, hanging out with me this week. I wish you all the best in your reading journals, and I hope you have an amazing March.